It is 4 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started with the Downtown Design Review Board for Thursday, September 14th. We'll start with item 1.1, call to order, and item 1.2, confirmation from staff that we have confirmation of Kansas Open Meetings Act's requirements are being met.
I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
Thank you.
I'm going to call roll here under item 1.3 and just bring to the board's attention that on August 31st, the terms of 3 design review board members expired, board member Kitchen, Noonan, and Martins, and so they were not eligible to be reappointed. So we have been joined by Joshua Doak to the left of Mr. Manley, and he is a new board member in his first meeting. So we have the 3 members present, so I will call roll. Mr. Romey.
Here.
Mr. Doak.
Here.
Mr. Manley.
Present.
So we currently have 3 board members appointed. We're searching for some more, but 3 constitutes a quorum, which allows us to consider today's business. And the first order of business before the board is item 2.1, which is to consider approval of the minutes from the last regular meeting, which was August 24th, 2023. It was a fairly lengthy meeting, lots of discussion, lots of different motions, and so Mr. Manley was a participant via Zoom. The other members were not physically here, but please take whatever time you need to look through that to see if you think that they're reflective of what took place, and then if a member is comfortable, they should make a motion to approve the minutes with or without any amendments.
I will go ahead and make that motion to approve.
I second it.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to approve the August 24th minutes. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, so we've taken care of our administrative housekeeping, and we have had 2 public hearings that we advertised for today's meeting date. And item 3.1, a portion of that application is being carried over to today's meeting. And that application had 3 parts to it. It was a request for a certificate of compatibility to allow exterior modifications to be made to the brick facade portion of the yard at the corner of 4th Street and Walnut. And the 3 elements of that were a painted wall sign reading "the yard," a painted symbol in the shape of a base that was around the front entry door, and then a proposal to create a backdrop for those by painting the facade of that building black with acrylic or latex paint. And so we have provided with you some background of the original action and approval of the original facade for the yard back in 2021. And then subsequent to that, there was a sign that was placed in the area underneath the canopy there that faces south. And so now the current project proposal, as I noted, is proposal number 1 to paint the entire masonry exterior of the east facade with black paint. Proposal number 2 to paint off-white archway or gray archway over the east entryway facing 4th Street. And a proposal to add a painted wall sign identifying the yard. And so we have put illustrations into your packet. And so on page 3 of your report, it states that under the certificate of compatibility requirement that no person shall perform or cause to be performed any work to construct, demolish, or change the existing exterior design, material, or color, or appearance of any building or other improvement to real property in the business improvement district without review and approval of a certificate of compatibility. So that is the reason why that we are here today. Items that don't require coming before this board for a building owner would be anything that is routine maintenance or anything where there's maintenance that doesn't involve any change to design or material or color or appearance, or if we have a cornice falling off a building or crumbling brick, then staff can authorize emergency repairs without coming before this board. So you don't need a building permit per se to paint a building, but a certificate of compatibility is required to paint a previously unpainted building facade or to change the color of an existing surface. And so we have provided you with a summary of the guidelines from the Downtown Design Review Guidelines and a summary of what occurred at the last meeting. So at the last meeting on August 24th, the board voted to postpone consideration of the yard's proposal to paint the entire exterior facade facing 4th Street to today's meeting, to either allow modifications to be made to the original proposal or to allow staff to prepare a separate written set of findings that could be used to support approval of the yard's request without setting a precedent for future requests in other locations in the downtown. And then the board took a second action, and that was to approve the proposal to paint the gray base symbol and also to have the white painted yard sign that you see in the lower right corner. I think it's the belief, and I can't speak for the applicant, but I believe that the part of the design, the total design to have the desired effect is based on having the backdrop or background be black. And so, although those items are approved, they may be dependent on the other action. So on page 7, we just threw out options that were provided between the meetings. Other options besides painting the entire facade, and one would be to paint a black or gray box just for a background for the yard sign. One would be having the base symbol with a awning over the door that read the yard. One would be to paint the base symbol and incorporate the yard sign within the base symbol. One option is to resubmit the same request to paint the entire building face black and provide additional supporting factors justifying approval, or to withdraw the painting request and just proceed with the base symbol and the wall sign. There could be some other design alternatives that the applicant may wish to present, but at the time that we sent our packet out, we didn't have anything different, so we're bringing back the same proposal. And so, as we indicated, the applicant would like to cover over the original brick facade with a black acrylic or latex paint to form a backdrop for the other symbols, images, and signs. And that paint would be applied to the entire storefront as well as the mortar joints, trim, and the light stone detail. And so what we have done is, from our original report, we have pointed out that the downtown design guidelines encourage the preservation and maintenance of original facade materials. Brick is the traditional material in downtown Salina and contributes to the architectural character of Santa Fe and adjacent streets. And so staff's job is to point out to the board what the design guidelines say and to support those guidelines when possible. So if we have board members take their packets and refer to page 9 of the staff report, on that page we have repeated our original possible or suggested findings that would support denial of the painting of the masonry facade. And so we've provided 5 findings that could be made to say this should not be allowed in this particular location. And so then below that, if the design review board, we were asked to present and prepare some written findings that could be used because there was some discussion about this being 4th Street and not Santa Fe. Are there findings that could be set out that would help the board deal with this case and not set an unfavorable precedent for other locations? And so at the bottom of page 9, we have set out that the existing masonry on this brick warehouse portion of the yard is not in good condition, is in need of maintenance and some form of exterior treatment. The yard property is unique compared to other downtown street fronts or storefronts because large portions of the 4th Street frontage are modernistic and non-historic. And I don't recall, Dustin, whether we have any kind of zoomed out views that show the whole 4th Street perspective. I'm not sure that we do.
We
Except,
don't in the packet.
yeah, there are some things in the packet, but the thing that finding 2 points out is that we're focusing on this 50-foot storefront here, but this 50-foot storefront is part of a 240-foot frontage on 4th Street. So if you look at the entire frontage facing 4th Street, it's 240 feet. This is only 20% of that. So in terms of making the question of could you distinguish this from, say, a storefront on Santa Fe, one thing that distinguishes this is it's not a single storefront, it's multiple storefronts, and it's made up of frontages that are more than just traditional brick masonry. Finding 3 is that the yard property is unique compared to other downtown properties because black is already a predominant color on the property. Again, if you look at the wrought iron fencing or the wire fencing and those things, there's a lot of black that is built into the construction materials already. The location is unique compared to other downtown properties, say on Santa Fe or 5th or Iron or Walnut, because the yard faces 4th Street, which contains railroad tracks and has a more industrial type character than other downtown streets and traditional storefronts. So again, I'm not saying that the design guidelines are written primarily or only for Santa Fe, but a lot of the content that's in the design guidelines is based on characteristics that are present on Santa Fe that the guidelines are trying to protect. And so one distinction here is that this is 4th Street, and 4th Street certainly has a different character than Santa Fe because of the railroad tracks and other features. And then the other factor is that painting the exterior of the yard facade black would contrast the yard facade from the multi-bay car museum facade to the north. And so you can be the judge of that, but these warehouses were built historically, had multiple bays, and this was one of those bays. And even though this brick is slightly different color, a case could be made to say, well, this would help us show the public that this building's part of the yard and not part of the car museum. So that was potential finding number 5. And so on page 10, we have set out your alternatives, recognizing that the base symbol and the painted yard sign were already approved. Alternative 1 is to approve the facade renovation project as proposed by the applicant, based on a finding that just cleaning and preserving the existing brick is not feasible or desirable in this case, and that an exception to the design guidelines is justified in this case. And that notes that the board should articulate the factors that make this case unique. You could further postpone this case to consider other options, to explore alternatives, to obtain different information than what we have provided to date. And if that was your desire, you would need to make that date known in any motion that you had, and we could help you with those future meeting dates. Or you could deny the exterior painting project based on the fact that the painting of intact brick facades is discouraged by the downtown design guidelines. And so if the board were to deny the application or attach conditions that weren't agreeable, the building owner has the right to appeal that decision to the city commission following any decision this board might make. So what we've noted is that we feel as a staff that our job is to educate and inform on what the design guidelines say. We feel like we've done that. We've also noted that they're guidelines, they're not rules or regulations, and the board is free. You're not creating a waiver or an exception because they are in fact guidelines. It's just that a lot of people rely on past decisions for future decisions, and so if you make good findings, or if you think the findings are good, then it's not going to set an unfavorable precedent for other cases. If you don't find the alternate findings that staff has tried to prepare very convincing, then you should tell us that. And so if you were to approve this, we had suggested 2 conditions on page 11, and that was that if there were any significant changes, that those would present to staff, and we would determine whether those changes would need to come back before this board for further review. And then the other thing is that the status of the facade, the 4th Street facade sign for JRI, that was not a permitted sign by whatever sign company installed that, and so we would want to have approval of that sign applied for or have the sign removed within 30 days. We're hopeful that if it's Gleason and Sons or someone, that they will work with us to get that permitted. So with that, we'd be answer any questions that board members might have. Might have to borrow a swig of your water. I've talked too much.
Well, speaking for myself, being the only member here last time, I'm fairly familiar with the request and the project, so I'll defer to my other 2 members if they have any questions before we give the applicant an opportunity to speak.
Didn't we, a couple of months ago, approve the painting of the attorney's offices on their whole property?
We did, but that was painted when it was originally built, and it's also not a masonry. It's not a brick masonry finish, and so there is not because it's a unusual aggregate stucco finish that doesn't really exist on any other building downtown. There wasn't a need to have a protection of the original masonry facade because there never was an original masonry facade. So that was a repainting of an existing building that was built that way. And so this is the painting of original brick masonry that's never been painted before. And so that it is different from that standpoint because the design guidelines discourage the painting. They encourage the preservation and maintenance of the original facade materials, which in this case is brick masonry.
And I just want to get clarification on my interpretation of the minutes from last one. So how I'm reading it is more or less the issue of the painting of the whole black is of question. If the outline of what basically kind of looks like a home plate in the yard seemed like the committee members were okay with that, it's really the question of if the black facade is
Right.
the real question mark here.
It was the fact that the painting of the base symbol and the painting of the yard sign are only a portion of the total facade, and this was a proposal to essentially take the entire brick facade and paint the entire brick facade black. And so that was the aspect of the project that the previous board members were kind of struggling with and going back and forth on. And one of the challenges that they were having is it's kind of difficult for board members sitting up there to try to come up with or articulate findings on the fly, sitting up there at the dais. So what was asked of staff is, could you prepare an alternate set of findings in writing that we could review ahead of the meeting or at the meeting, and to see if that would give us more comfort that we wouldn't be setting a precedent for future cases. And just by way, we didn't include in our report, but just by way of background, because we participated in that case, but there was a previous case before the board that was to paint the blonde brick, original brick, on the Eccentricities building on Santa Fe, to paint that black, and the board turned that down, and that was upheld by the city commission. And so that is still blonde brick today. And so one of the concerns is if a board member says, well, we think it's okay here, or we think this is a sufficiently different property from this, help us as a staff, help us to articulate so that we can in the future say, well, this is not the same as the yard over on 4th Street because of this, this, and this. And so what we tried to do in our report on page, if I get it right, 9 or 10, is on page 9, was we put alternate findings that the board could hang their hat on without having to come up with them on the fly at a meeting. And so I think that's what the board, and that's why there were so many motions, and that's why there were so many back and forth, because almost all the board members at the meeting could see both sides of the question, but they were struggling with what to base their decision on.
There are no other questions from this group. Can we hear from the applicant?
Chairman, members, thank you. The biggest thing, and would you mind putting the picture of as it looks today? So, I mean, I'm all about making sure Salina is on the right track and looking great for the future. And, you know, I've grappled with the same thing, had a little bit of heartburn over the idea of painting the whole thing. Above the door there's an area that used to be painted, and, you know, I'm like, what do we do with that? The whole brick needs sealed somehow anyway, and I have just been unable to reconcile a design that I like better. I love the design. Eric Montoya at Vortex helped me come up with that, and I think it fits the whole motif of the yard. I absolutely would not want to set some weird precedent, you know, where there's now brick being painted lime green or something, you know, but in this case with it matching the motif, it really would, it wouldn't be much darker than the garage's brick, but it would just have a solid color, and it would allow the yard sign to pop and the home plate. It's more like the wall becomes, with the home plate, is almost like a watermark is the design. And not to say that the front of a building should be a mural, but in some ways we're sort of making the yard part of the art movement of the downtown in some ways, with just a really unique design that captures the essence of what we're doing over there. It definitely, if you could see all the way down the street, it's all black. The building on the corner is black. Everything's kind of in that black and white motif, and it looks sharp. I think anyway, I think it looks really sharp. So we definitely want to keep it that way. If we can, to me, the only other alternative is to leave it as it is, try to seal up the brick some way and just paint white on the brick. And I just don't like it as well. I just don't think it'll look as attractive if we leave that unpainted portion up there. And so that's really the only, to me, it's one or the other. And it sounds like we probably have approval for that, but I would rather see us take this all the way through and make the yard one whole look to it. So I wanted to speak to the JRI sign up there. Gleason and Sons did that work for us, and last time you showed the sign inside the field that was approved, but it didn't need to be approved. When they did that, the plan was that this and that were to be approved, and so I don't know if something got lost in translation there, but we were under the impression that that was approved along with the one that didn't even need to be approved inside. So I apologize. We can redo that.
I think that would have made sense to us. We were a little bit puzzled upon receiving the application for the sign that was underneath the canopy that wasn't really visible, and I said, well, we have an application, we have a fee. It would make perfect sense that this would have been attached to it and that this would have come forward to it, but there are sometimes we have learned on previous cases that there are miscommunications between the customer service side and the installation crew side in terms of coordinating their things. So that's all we really need to know, is that we'll work with Gleason and Sons to make that work, and
Okay.
it's not anything that the yard needs to worry about. Gleason and Sons is the licensed contractor. They're the ones responsible for it, and we will work with them.
Yeah, and I'm certain that it's just a gap in communication. As the guy that paid the fee for the sign that didn't need to be approved, I'm thinking they knew that because they told us what needed to be approved and what didn't. So I think it just was a gap. So anyway,
I think
thank
the
you.
intent was correct, but they may have
Yeah.
just attached the wrong
I agree.
drawings to it.
Totally. What questions can I answer about the facade? Is there anything that I can do to help at this point? I appreciate that there is at least an opportunity to potentially just approve it as designed, you know, and knowing that it doesn't set a precedent because it is such a unique property. I would certainly like it that way myself, you know, but not, you know, that I would love to see it go through as approved if we can. If not, we'll just paint on the red. So, thank you guys. Thank you all.
So part of that, again, is to basically what in almost any case, it doesn't matter if it's the Planning Commission, the Design Review Board, the Board of Zoning Appeals, I tell our staff that when we have a case come before a board, we ought to be able to write findings on both sides of the decision, because that's why it's a decision, because there's two sides to it. So on page 9, we've written findings that would support one position or one point of view, and we've tried to write alternate findings to say that there is a way to approve this without potentially setting a precedent for other downtown locations. And part of that is, as the board looks through those 5 findings, whether you find them persuasive, 1, and 2, whether you think that they are sufficient to hold against a future case to say, well, this is why we approve the yard, and this is why we don't think what you're doing on this street in this particular context is a good idea. And so that's the purpose of having the findings, that's the purpose of having the minutes, that's the purpose of why we have these things in writing, so there's a record to say this was the basis for this decision, and you're not putting forward a project that's the same as what the board decided on September 14th, 2023. So.
Is there any other comments from interested citizens or from anybody online?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, it's Leslie with Slide Downtown. Mr. Andrew, question on the painting, the acrylic black paint, and you had mentioned the masonry was not in the best condition. My first question is, would that paint be of help to the masonry on the yard facade? And then secondly, when the river development begins, you know, I know it's slow, but it's going to be happening. Won't that whole area over there across from the street from the yard have some new brickwork? Do you know?
Well, I don't. We have the Art Center warehouse is across the street. There's some other warehouse type buildings, but what distinguishes 4th Street from Santa Fe is the fact that you have a railroad running down the middle of the street. Because you have a railroad running down the middle of the street, most of the adjoining buildings were designed as warehouse type construction and not your traditional retail or office storefront. So that does distinguish 4th Street from Santa Fe. But there's a project farther north that's more opposite the garage, where they're looking at constructing a plaza that would overlook the river and the river project. But I'm not aware of any plans related to the buildings on the east side of the street. That's going to be a decision for those owners. But what we have pointed out is there's buildings downtown. The Stiefel Theater is one of them. There's companies out there that specialize in cleaning and treating and the original brick facade and doing sealing work. What happens is you get moisture penetration into some of the cracks and in the mortar joints and things, and the facade starts to crumble a little bit or deteriorate. And so one option is there's a number of products out there that can help preserve or protect the natural brick facade that are essentially clear sealants, and then painting is another option. But what you see is, and it shows in the picture now, is that once you paint a brick facade, even if over the course of time, I don't know how old that painted sign or that was, but I'm sure it was quite long ago. So once you paint a building, it starts a cycle of having to paint and repaint and all, because the paint will fade or the paint will soak into the brick. And so all we're pointing out is that that when you paint, you kind of set up a cycle for repainting and maintenance over time. And so there's options to assist with waterproofing and protecting a poor quality masonry finish, and that was done in the case of the Stiefel Theater. And then there's painting is also a method that can be used to help seal and prevent moisture penetration on brick. So those are the two approaches, and so it's just partially. When you start having spalling brick or you start having some moisture penetration, you usually have to do one or the other, either something that is waterproofing and sealant and cleaning of the brick to help with moisture penetration, or it's painting to help seal the brick. And so in this case, it's not crumbling or falling off, but there is some deterioration on the brick. It needs some treatment, and the owner has opted to use paint as that method, as an exterior treatment.
Are there any other questions or comments from citizens? All right, we'll bring it back to the board. Any other questions or comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Okay.
So again, we have findings, alternate two sets of findings on page 9, and on page 10 we've laid out 3 options. One is approving the facade renovation as proposed by the applicant, and that is based on a finding that just cleaning and preserving the existing brick is not feasible or desirable in this particular case, and an exception to the guidelines is justified. Or you could postpone again if you think you want to explore alternatives or obtain new information, or you could deny the painting project, which would mean that the yard sign and the base symbol could go forward, but without the backdrop of the facade being painted black. So those are the options that we've set out for you on page 10.
Since I was involved from the get-go, I can make the motion, can't I?
Yes.
Okay, I will go ahead and make the motion to approve option 1, the facade renovation project as proposed by the applicant, based upon finding that cleaning and preservation of the existing brick facade is not feasible or desirable. In this case, with or without, with conditions, and I will reference a handful that were noted on page 9. I will note them as 2 through 7. I'm going to skip number 1 because I do believe the brick as it is, although it may not be aesthetically pleasing, it is probably in good shape. Something has to be done, but not necessarily this. But the rest of them I do think are applicable. Number 2 being the yard property is unique compared to other downtown street fronts because a large portion of the yards for street frontage are modernistic and non-historic. The brick warehouse portion covers only 20% of the facility's 240 feet of frontage. I think that's a key element. The yard property is unique compared to other downtown properties because black is the predominant color on the property. And when you do see an image of the entire property, that you can see that come together. The yard's location is also unique compared to other properties, most notably Santa Fe, 5th Street, Iron, and Walnut. The yard faces 4th Street. It's more industrial, contains railroad tracks. This would be the fourth one. Painting the exterior of the yard facade black would contract the yard facade from the natural brick multi-bay car museum facade to the north, and then 2 additional findings contrary to the garage. It has architectural features, and I did not see any architectural features or anything of historical significance on the proposed structure that's being painted. And then lastly, at our last meeting, we did approve the building to be partially painted, and so we're already not halfway there, 20% of the way there. You're painting masonry as it is, so the same conditions are going to be present in the foreseeable future. So that was my lengthy motion.
Nicely done. I'd have to agree with that too, the option 1. I think it'll look good with all the artwork that's already going up downtown on the brick walls that we've looked at that's pretty beat up over the years.
So does that constitute a second?
Yep, I second it.
Okay, so we have a motion from Board Member Manley, a second from Board Member Romy to approve option 1, that is to approve the facade renovation project as proposed by the applicant based on the findings 2 through 5 and the 2 additional findings set out by the maker of the motion. So all those in favor of approving option 1, please say aye.
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 Okay. That motion carries by a vote of 3-0 with those findings. And I wanted, for the benefit of the board and for the owner, is that what we do is that we get the minutes from today's meeting. We will prepare a letter that we will send to the owners summarizing today's meeting, and that letter will contain the findings made by Mr. Manley, and so those go into the address file, so there is a record of the decision made and the basis for that decision. And so people 2 years from now say, well, how did that decision get made at 138 South 4th Street? You pull out the approval letter and say, well, this is what the board found, and you don't have any of these characteristics. So that's how we document the decisions of the board, and so people always have that to go back to. So I appreciate your care with which you approach that issue, and we'll get that in written form to you and let you move forward, and we'll take care of working with Gleason.
Thank you.
Before we move on to the next item, staff would want to confirm whether or not that motion included the 2 conditions on page 11. Was that part of the motion? Or did you intend it to be part of the motion?
I just looked down at those 2. Mr. Andrew, how would you suggest? Is it a modification to the motion on the 2 items of any significant changes that come back to?
Well, the guy, option 1 says with or without conditions. So if the maker of the motion said that your intent was to include those conditions and Mr. Romy agrees with that, then we don't need any further action, because the way it's written, it says that the exception is justified and that the motion is with or without conditions. And if the maker of the motion says the intent was to include those conditions and Mr. Romy says he agrees with the inclusion of those 2 conditions, then no further action is needed. So if that was your intent, Mr. Romy, or in the motion you second, are you supportive of including those 2 conditions on
Yes.
page 11?
Yes.
Okay. So the answer to your question, Mr. Hers, is that the motion included conditions 1 and 2 on page 11.
Thank you.
So the second item that we have for you this evening is at the corner of corner of Iron and South Fifth Street. It's a property where we looked at a sign for the donut shop facing Fifth Street before, but this is for a tenant space facing Iron. And we have a request that has come forward for a prospective tenant of the corner tenant space, and that would be the Restoration Church. And they have submitted a proposal to erect 2 wall signs, one facing Iron and one facing Fifth Street. And they are proposed to be located so that they're on the awning that is on the front, and they have been designed and located so that they would be on the balance portion of that awning that is designed to have signs. And so the signs would be modest. They would be 1 by 8 in size. They are non-illuminated, and they would be attached to the valance portion of the building's metal awning. So everything that we see in terms of the sign, from the size to the design and appearance to the illumination and to its location, appears to staff to be consistent with the downtown design guidelines. And we have provided some possible findings on page 5 of your report, which is, we do think that the wall sign will be coordinated with the overall facade. They're not going to cover any architectural features. They're proportionate in scale with the building's frontage. They use colors and materials that are compatible with the front facade. They're not illuminated, and they're attached to the valance portion of the awning. It will make the church location more recognizable for motorists and pedestrians, and the signs fit within the size limitations for that building. So we've provided you with alternatives on page 6, and if you wish to approve this request for the wall signs, we would recommend that you include the following conditions of approval: that the applicant, upon approval, would apply for and obtain a sign permit prior to installation of those signs, and if there's any significant change to the sign design or the materials as presented to the board, that those would be presented to staff, and we would determine whether that needs to come back to you for any additional review. So with that, I'd be open to any questions, but we think this is a pretty straightforward request, and it's consistent with what the new awning facade that was put on this building was set up for. So,
Are these taking the place of the red signs, or are they in addition to? Are those still existing?
There's no signs there.
There's no, okay.
So this is what they're suggesting.
the sign or the photograph that I included in the packet was from an earlier time, probably in April or so, when we were first discussing the signs for the daylight, or for the donut shop. And so this sign was already up at that time, but I believe it's since been taken down and the space is vacant.
Any other questions or comments?
We do have a representative of the Restoration Church here if you had any specific questions for the church about the sign or anything related to the tenant space.
Is there a preference on materials? Want to see?
I'll have you come up and make sure we have it recorded.
So I think and I've got to find the information, I think it was in the letter attached. It says that the church is planning to use vinyl material for the sign, but are open to using metal in line with the Subvert Studio sign 2 doors to the west if that is preferred. And so the question, I guess, is that the default position of the Restoration Church is that they would like to put up a vinyl sign in that location, but they're open to using metal if that is the preference of the board in terms
that
of
was
the
my question.
metal lettering. Mr. Hers reviews more signs than I do, so maybe I'll let him try to describe what he believes is the difference between the vinyl and the metal lettering in terms of how it's applied.
Well, how it would be applied, my understanding is most vinyl signs are going to have a plastic composition to them, and typically are applied to a surface with that adhesive, where a metal sign would just in fact be metal and sometimes vinyl on metal, and those are physically attached to the surface with some sort of mechanical like screw or something like that. So a lot of times the metal signs would be a metal panel that is either painted or has a vinyl on it that is physically attached to the face of the awning, or in the case of vinyl would be a plastic type of film that is then applied with an adhesive to the surface.
What is more used in the downtown area or for this area?
Typically the metal, because it comes off easier, because it's fastened through a physical mechanical fasten, like I said, like a screw or something like that, that then if it's removed can just be unscrewed and you don't have any remaining residual material. Similar like the last case we just heard where they have residual paint on the building, having a physical metal panel that's attached with a screw then can be removed at a later date if it needed to be.
Okay.
Is it fair to say that this board doesn't need to distinguish between which one we prefer? It's up to the applicant because both are used in downtown.
Yeah, I don't think the design guidelines are specific as to encouraging one material over the other. It's just it has slightly to do with appearance, and I think what we've seen here is that this has been a location that historically has seen some turnover of tenants, and generally we're not seeing a case where a sign's been installed by a previous tenant and it leaves so much residue behind that you can't replace it with a new one. So I think with the metal awning that's here that there's no compelling case in the guidelines to preferring one material over the other. So I'm presuming that the church's position is that they would like to use vinyl unless there was a requirement that it be metal. Is that fair?
Personally, I think metal would be better, as you pointed out. You can attach it, it comes off easy without residue. So we'll discuss it.
Okay.
Church, if they're
Yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily anything that the board has to weigh into. You're approving the location and size of the sign. I think that they have to submit a sign permit application, and I think at that point, staff will work directly with the applicant on vinyl versus metal and the virtues of both. But you're just being asked to approve 1x8 wall signs in 2 locations that aren't lighted signs, and they're not. It doesn't matter if it's vinyl or metal; they're not going to be illuminated. So.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments from anybody online? Hearing none, I'll bring it back. Any questions or comments from the board? If not, I will entertain a motion to, just a motion.
Yeah, I propose we go with option 1, approve the proposal wall sign for the church upon finding that the proposed sign will conform to the design guidelines for downtown Salina.
Second.
I'll make a clarification. Do you want to include the two items below? The applicant shall apply for a sign permit as well as any significant changes?
Yes, correct.
And I'll second that.
Okay.
So I have a motion and a second to approve the application with the two conditions identified in the staff report. So I'll call for the question. All those in favor of approving application filed by Restoration Church, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We don't have any administrative or preliminary discussion items for the board. I will point out that we had 3 members whose terms expired. They were replaced by 1 member, Mr. Doak, and 1 member can't equal 3, so we have 3 appointees right now. We're working to encourage some additional expressions of interest, and so for now, we do have a demolition case that's scheduled for September 28th, and because of some uncertainties preparing for today's meeting, we decided it would be best to give some time and to have the training session and the annual business meeting and election of officers on the 28th of September. But if we get some feedback that it's only a matter of time to get some additional members appointed, we could push that back to the meeting in October, because it's when you have elections for chair and vice chair and you only have 3 members, you don't have a lot of cushion. So as it stands, I can report, 1, that we will have a meeting on the 28th of September. Secondly, we're trying to solicit some additional interest to get some board members appointed, and then we're going to kind of play it by ear whether we have election of officers on the 28th or wait till we get some additional members appointed. So that would be my report, that we will have a meeting on the 28th, and we'll kind of play it by ear whether we try to have that be your annual business meeting or move that back to October. So
Seems like a silly question, but is 2 quorum in a
yeah,
table
so
of
we
3?
have, the way the bylaws are is that a quorum is a majority of the number of members appointed. And currently the number of members appointed is 3, so a quorum is 2, but having just 2 and having an even number kind of makes making motions and seconds, and then if you have 2 people and they don't see the application the same way, it's kind of hard to get anything done because they cancel each other out. So everything works better if we have more. This is a 7-member board and we have 3 members, so we're going to try to work with SDI and get some additional membership.
Does the other 4 members have any need to be specific?
There
representation?
are spots on there. There's a spot on there for a design professional. There's a spot on there for a downtown business or property owner, and then the rest of them are city at large. So you don't own a business or property downtown, so you would be in the citizen at large category, and Mr. Manley and Mr. Romy are both associated with downtown businesses. So that's so the clerk's office, when they advertise positions, they advertise what those spots are. But for the most part, in my experience, we've always had an architect on the board, and in many cases, we've had an attorney on the board. And so we're gonna start there, and then we'll work with SDI to put the word out among people who are downtown business or property owners to get engaged. So I think unless other board members have other business, we would just entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, we're officially adjourned. Thank you. It's 5 o'clock, not bad.